I'm excited.
We're going live on YouTube now. We're going to start in a few minutes. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Austin Ivy Plus Virtual Speaker Series, hosted here in Zoom and streaming live on YouTube from Austin, Texas. My name is Stephanie Pace. I'm a realtor here in Austin and the president of the Cal Alumni Club of Austin, an affiliate chapter of the Cal Alumni Association at UC Berkeley, and an active social and professional networking organization of more than 300 Cal alumni living in Austin, Texas.
Hi, my name is Shlomi, and I'm an entrepreneur in Austin and a member of the Austin Ivy Plus. This event not only represents UC Berkeley, but also represents Austin Ivy Plus, a collection of over 1,000 Austin-based alumni from all the Ivy League schools, the Seven Sisters, and several prestigious private and public universities. Tonight, we're highlighting the incredible work of Austin-based superstar Kiana Shelton. Here's a little bit about her mission and background.
Suggested ratio of managers to employees ranges from 1 to 6 to 1 to 8. Any given organization can have anywhere from 15 to 30% of their workforce in charge of the work streams of other people. In an inclusive organization, understanding the impact of managers remains one of the single largest factors in workforce retention and happiness. This conversation aims to add current and future people managers in finding and developing talent in a way that acknowledges the distinct needs of their varied reports.
Kiana is a Stanford graduate and a longtime educator who began her career as a high school French teacher in her hometown of Atlanta, Georgia. She currently works in corporate learning and development.
We have one request for our audience. Please mute your audio when our speaker is talking and remain muted until audience Q&A. If audio does become an issue, we'll be forced to remove you from tonight's event.
Kiana, we're ready to hear from you. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Shlomi, for inviting me and for that wonderful introduction. I'm excited to be here, as well as hopefully share some information and, more importantly, be in conversation with tonight's audience about a topic that I'm very interested in, and quite frankly, a topic that is pretty germane given our current societal need and really organizational needs as a whole. So, like everyone on Zoom, I'm gonna share my screen because we have to announce that now. So let me make sure that I have this together for you. I'm gonna disappear, but you'll still hear my disembodied voice. Hopefully that's not too weird. All right, and we'll present. Okay, wonderful. All right, so today I'd love to just start a conversation with you about people management in an inclusive world. Nowadays, people management is the norm. Chances are, if you are working for yourself, you probably have to manage some resources or your own workers. If you're working at a company, that becomes more traditional in terms of people management structures. Even if you're not a de facto people manager, you will have people within your purview and your line of sight where you will need to be making strategic management people-based decisions. So no matter who you are and no matter where you are in terms of your career, you're going to be affected by people management, by being a manager, or, as many of us are, being managed by other people. Okay. So what I hope to talk to you about today, just a little snippet of what could be it could be a discussion for the ages, is how do we adjust to the need for effective people management now, particularly when we have this lens around DEI and making our workspaces more reflective of our population here in America and having equitable practice. Big questions, which I'm going to shed a teensy bit of light on. And so hopefully when we get to the Q&A, we can collaborate and talk some more about this topic together. Okay. So people remember managers, not organizations. From my own anecdotal experience working in HR and just in general, there are a lot of Gallup polls, US Department of Labor. There have been many studies on workforce and what makes a good workforce, what makes people happy at work. And without fail, one of the top reasons why we see a lot of attrition and discontent in our organizations are bad management practices. People rarely remember the organizations or what they're doing or the projects they worked on. Some they will, some they won't. For the most part, people are like, how was I treated? What was my environment like? And that has become a determining factor in people management success or failure. So about 1 in 15 workers are going to manage people on a daily basis. So these aren't even people in de facto manager roles. That more comes to your ratio of about 1 to 6 or 1 to 7, depending on organizational depth and capacity. But people are going to be interacting with people, and more importantly, giving them direction and creating the culture in which they work. Okay. Managers are going to account for 70% of workforce engagement. Right? When we're talking about ways to get our employees involved in meaningful work or have business outputs and really be innovative and push for those ideas, a lot of that structure comes from managers supporting those movements, clearing paths for those movements, and ultimately become a huge deciding factor in people's feelings about how they work. Okay. According to this is back in 2018, a Mercer poll basically said that about 1/3 of employees at any given time plan to exit their organization within the next year. So this attrition has become really regular in terms of opportunity. We're not seeing people staying at places for years and years and years. Some people will call that generational, right? The rest of us down here will basically say our working conditions have changed and they no longer address our needs. So, our typical okay boomer of, oh, you young kids don't want to stay around here anymore, or the workplace, they're hiring all these young whippersnappers with 3 years of experience so they don't pay me. Yes, that is how capitalism works. We'll get into like the underscore of that, but it's also meaning that every business is dealing with this insane level of attrition, and how can we get people to stay? Okay. And then what does all this mean if our people management focused on finding, keeping, and growing talent, right? What happens to all this when we layer over this other necessity of having inclusive, safe, people-oriented, equitable workplaces? This becomes compounded. Okay. So we'll talk a little about motivation and then the practice therein. What's my motivation? Of course, if you're, born, if you're as old as I'm, you're at least 30, like Chris Tucker, what's my motivation? This is what is my motivation here? Okay. So Daniel Pink is an author. He's a people management leader and author of several books. One of his most recent works is Drive. And in this, he says people have an inherent tendency to seek out novelty and change, to extend and exercise their capacities to explore and learn. What Daniel Pink is positing here is that engagement and work product comes down to needing to create cohesiveness between our natural innate desire for challenge and exploration and meaningfulness, right? This is what is coming from people when they look for work. Right? But here's some issues that confound this. Different people have different motivations. And again, this is, oh, come on now. Different people have different motivations, and this is clear, different strokes for different folks, right? You're going to have certain employees that are motivated by different things than others. And this ultimately will underscore their want, ability, and capacity to learn and explore and rise to new challenges. Okay. Those motivations are at odds with current professional environment. Even though we are saying that we thrive best in these exploratory, capacity expanding environments, that's 100% what we're not being met with. Right? The motivations of most people are at odds with current professional environments. And I feel like I don't even have to explain that too much. If you worked a job, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Right? And so satisfaction with work, our key word for this entire little talk in the rest of the 15 minutes in which I will be talking to you is engagement, okay? That's going to be the difference between having a workforce that is constantly turning over, that's in attrition, that doesn't meet the needs of its varied population in an inclusive, culture-binding, equitable way. It all comes down to how are we engaging our employees, i.e., are we connecting to their intrinsic motivations? So this is a nice little graph that I borrowed. There's this company here based in Austin called Ability, and they do professional leadership development using simulation-based trainings. I used to work there, so that's why I have this nifty graph. But here, this is coming from some surveys done by Gallup, Towers Perrin, and it's basically showing that at any given time, this is the pool of your employees. 30% of them are engaged, right? These are people who are actively putting forth discretionary effort. They're customer forward, they're driven, they're really driving your business forward. Okay. About 50%, we're talking about half of an organization, a substantial amount, are literally just there collecting their paycheck. They're like, I go in, I do my simple work, I leave, I've made my check, I'm done. This is your consummate DMV worker, right? I'm stamping in, I'm stamping out. No shade to the DMV. I'm sure there are people who derive much pleasure from working at the DMV. However, you know, our stereotype of that bureaucratic government worker, I'm checking in, I'm checking out. And then we have 20% of people who are actually undermining your efforts. What they are contributing to the business is chaos, right? They don't like it there. They're disgruntled. They're discouraged workers, right? You have people who are not only just kind of treading water, but they are in fact rolling back any improvement that you could have. So if we're looking at 70% essentially of our workforce is not engaged in pushing our directive forward, what changes that? So again, Daniel Pink posits that our motivations basically fall into these particular buckets, right? Status, possession, companionship, purpose, autonomy, security, achievement, recognition. Some of these things are pretty easy to understand, right? If I'm a person who views having status as being important, wielding some influence or power, right? I will look for work that allows me to do that. If I'm a person who really likes people, right? My work can't be siloed. I can't be working by myself in a cubicle every day. I need to be on team-related relational projects, right? My drive is companionship. Right? Security, and I would argue that though we may be quick to view security as monetary security, I would argue that that's probably very low on the list. Security comes more from having this secure in your work, that you will have this role, right? That there is something there that will always be there for you to do and drive your practice, right? Side note, if we look at sort of what keeps people at organizations, it's never money, just in case anyone is wondering. It's literally never money. So in looking at motivations, and this is me kind of posing a rhetorical question out to people, you know, if we were to be interactive, I would essentially ask you to meditate on a while about which one of these things drive you to be your best self at work. Okay, I want you to think about that. As like, yeah, I'm gonna say, Stephanie, furrow your brow for a second. Think about which one of those, Shlomi, think about which one of those really drives you, wakes you up in the morning, which of these are important to you, okay? And now that you have a picture of that, ask yourself, does your current work environment engage these motivations that you have? I hope the answer is yes. I hope your work finds you at this place. However, for many people, because we are working in structures that are not in line with what we need as far as motivation, understandably, because business is business. However, you'll find that most people are working in working environments where they're overwhelmingly carrot stick based, right? You're either getting a carrot or a stick, right? If you're not doing something, there is some type of punitive response. If you are doing something, and when I say doing something, typically in our Judeo-Christian society, it looks like overwork, lack of rest, unnecessary production, just for the show of capitalism, right? We're all doing it for show, we're on a stage. That in and of itself, like that is the reward. And so then that has to loop back in, well, what are we rewarding as behavior? And so for most people, right, the reward that they are getting is not in line with what motivates them. Okay. And more importantly, as a manager, it now becomes your responsibility, I would say, as a person who is in charge of not just getting things done, but truly growing and developing people for your company, building their skills so that those skills can then build and help others and others and others, and creating this feedback loop of great people staying at your company, right? It's your imperative as a manager. And so the question becomes, are managers engaging people and meeting their motivations, right? I'll use myself as an example. My main motivator in my work is autonomy, hands down. If someone tried to micromanage me or wanted me to check in, or like needed to meet with me every day to see what I was doing, or was standing over my shoulder to make sure I was working exactly 7 hours a day, I would quit after a week. I'm like, the work got done. Don't worry about how it got done. It got there. So for me, no matter if this job pays $1 billion, right? If people are like, oh, your work is great, and they give me tons of rewards, and the work is fulfilling. I used to be a teacher, for Christ's sake. I love some rewarding, low-paying work. That is my bread and butter. Okay, I love being a poor do-gooder. It's my fave. I would still quit. I'd be like, no, because I can't do that. But that's what people think management is. Some managers, because of a lack of understanding around what motivates their employees, they oftentimes think that management is the same as observation, right? That management is the same thing as having work product materialize, right? That management is the same thing as clocking in and clocking out and making sure people are there on time, right? That's, for some people, that is what management is. It is also for some people a wielding of power in this weird egotistical way. And so then it becomes like, in what ways can I exercise control, right? Not how can I allow the people I work with to find their own paths or flourish or come into innovation. And so while I know our audience out here is like, of course, this is sensical. Like, you're not telling me anything new. Again, I would ask you to reflect. How much of your personal motivations actually match up with the work environment you're in? And what does your manager do to ensure that those things are matching together? Unfortunately, I think you would find that a lot of people would find some disparity in those two things, unfortunately. Okay. So I talked for about 15 minutes about people management, and just like a tiny piece, right? Here's a tiny piece that you can do as a people manager to make sure that no matter who you're touching, because again, inclusivity is not like, here's a strategy for the Black, Indigenous people of color, here's a strategy for the white people. It's really about people in general, right? So my tip for you in this first half is find out what motivates your employees, and then do things that appeal to those motivations, right? Create engagement and do it consistently, okay? If this were a longer talk, I would then branch into how feedback is important and how nobody ever gets enough feedback, and that's probably the number one failing in life, but it's a short time. So that's my quick tip for you. Find out your motivations, engage those employee motivations, watch the magic happen, I assure you. The next step is, so now that we're trying to engage people's motivations and find out what they need, what does this look like, right? Well, now the hot topic de rigueur is DEI. how are we making people management practices that are inclusive, right? I would argue if you're doing the first, chances are you're going to come to an equitable, belonging, rich environment, right? But let's talk about some stuff. Here's my 5 minutes of controversy, just I got to keep it hot for the conversations. Here's my controversy. Okay. So, let's go back. So expectations in the workplace. So I'm going to point out one thing that a lot of people do. And what works. So we're like, good people management works, but when we add on this layer of something, what works? And so the end result of this, I'm going to tell you, is what works is not doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Again, you're like, she's telling me some pretty simple stuff. One thing that I think people do, and I'm saying this to our audience in particular, this audience of elite people, take that how you will, who are in these spheres of influence, who have been in these institutions that hold up this faux meritocracy, right? But that has also conditioned us to certain things. We have certain expectations that we intrinsically know, right? One thing that managers do very poorly, right, in addition to not understanding their reports, is they oftentimes don't set clear expectations. So I'm giving you a little tidbit, something you can do tomorrow, right? You're like, finding motivators is a lot. All right, here's something you can do tomorrow. Ooh. So first thing, expectations require collaboration. A lot of times we're working in work environments where we sort of understand the game because we've had this type of acculturation, right? So let's use this example. The black icon is the manager, the little white icon is the report. I didn't do that on purpose, but I'm not mad at it. Okay, so you have this icon and it says, hey, will you take notes at today's meeting? I know you're new, but I want you to get right in there, okay? And the report says, sure thing. I'm excited to learn more about the team. All right, we have it. We're like, hey, take some meeting notes. Great, I'm gonna do it. What could go wrong here? Like, hey, Stephanie, take some meeting notes for me. Oh, Stephanie's like, cool. I have communicated zero expectations to Stephanie as to how, what, why, what needs to happen. And this is my own shortcoming. I worked for a nonprofit and I had a report of mine, young guy, had never worked in an office really environment before. He worked at Best Buy for his career. He was looking to get in the K-12. So I'm like, hey, will you take some meeting notes? He's like, yeah, sure. So when I got those meeting notes back, it was a transcript. He had literally transcribed our entire meeting word from word. And so I'm like, okay, that was not a good manager gig, right? Because obviously I don't need a transcription of our meeting. I need some concise, detailed notes that I could send to somebody on a page, right? So maybe if I had had this conversation, hey, I'd like you to jump right in by taking our meeting notes. We typically send out a one-pager of minutes to the partners, so a high-level and concise write-up is best. This person's like, great, I'll be sure to take detailed notes, but I'll distill them down for a quick, easy read. I'll send you a draft before sending as well. Our second scenario is more of an effort to communicate, right, expectations that otherwise would have gone unsaid. Another reason for the way you might hear this called implicit bias, right? I think implicit bias it's inherent and it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? We all have biases, they're fine. They kind of help us regulate in the world. But the issue that you're going to run into here, and particularly that scenario that I just described and also felt, had also fallen prey to myself, is a lot of times we judge people, their performance, when really we have been unclear with our expectation. So we end up with these biases towards people who we already know phenotypically, because we don't really have any evidence, but phenotypically these people look like they should suit our expectations. And so this is what we lean toward. When we try people who don't fit into those expectations and we don't make those expectations clear, we end up having people inadequately perform, but it is not because they're not capable. It's because we as managers haven't voiced opinions or expectations that we implicitly know, okay? Last little bit. So when I talk about DEI and one thing you can do to get, again, I told you about some motivations, and that's the big takeaway. We can, talk 3 more hours about that. And now I'm giving you something you can do tomorrow, right? Is set clear expectations. Because people of different races and ethnicities, people of different ability, okay, cognitively, physical ability, people of different family backgrounds, of different work experience, my report, who had only ever worked at Best Buy. You as a manager might be seeing a problem of performance that is actually a problem of perception. You have not clearly set expectations because you have assumed that a person who is in your purview shares the same viewpoint as you, and that is incorrect. So something you can do tomorrow, make the smallest things clear. You have a new person on your team, you're like, hey, welcome to the team. Here's what we do. Here are my expectations in terms of the work that you'll get. Even something as simple as professional dress, right? I think dress codes are wild, but if you have them, thank God we're all working from home. Even if you're like, oh, of course, it's an office, they'll know what to wear. We don't know what they're coming from. We don't know what might be appropriate to them. And so I would just say to any and all managers, just be aware of the clarity with which you're approaching your reports, okay? So that's something you can take away today. So I gave you a big idea, then I gave you a small idea. Just as a quick aside, and this is if we got to it, if we had time, and I'm pulling up on my Q&A time. But part of this, you're like, okay, so we're doing all this and we're thinking about DEI, what works? So this is a little bonus, right? I would just to give you some thoughts, right? So a lot of places, when we talk about DEI work, you're basically running into value signaling, right? They're not really doing anything. Talk to me about this later, because I want to leave ample time for questions, but I just wanted to posit as we're talking about management, as we're talking about things that we can do tomorrow. Right now, people are basically doing a lot of mimicking of current programs without a lot of success. And this is a little chart that basically shows you, right, the things that actually bring about diversity and change, and not your 1 hour diversity anti-bias trainings. Because I promise you, your white coworkers are still going to be racist after this next hour. Okay, so that doesn't matter. And again, I call them racist because white people think being racist means you're mean to Black people, when it in fact means that you are complicit in institutionally systematic structures. So I know that's difficult because people think that's being mean to Black people. It's not. But you can see here, these regular sort of engagement strategies are actually leading to increases in women, and particularly women minorities. When people do these, you actually see a decrease in white male leadership. We'll talk about that later. That's just a fun little graph that I was like, ooh, what's the T? So we can talk about that later. But here's some things that work, right? This is a little bonus. We're not going to get here. I talked way too much about my motivators. But if there's a round 2, we'll talk more about this. And then the moral of my story is engagement, engagement, engagement. Okay. So long story short, engage your employees because they're all going to have different motivations. And then 2, something you can do tomorrow in terms of reaching motivators is building rapport, right? And understanding that you carry explicit and implicit biases, implicit and explicit expectations. That if we made that a little bit clear, that's a way that we can get to employee motivations a lot quicker and increase engagement. Okay, that's my talk.
Thanks so much, Kiana. I love that talk, and that was so informative. So now we're going to open up our discussion to live questions from our audience. You can type in your questions in Zoom or in YouTube Live. Okay, here we go.
I'm ready. Ask me anything, because I love a little hyperbole, but you'd be like, you're wild. You can ask me anything. It's gonna be great. You can talk about that bonus section too. That's of interest. I got too excited when I'm talking.
We also have a few questions that were submitted to us via email in advance. I'm just gonna ask the first question that we received. What can I do if I'm not a people leader to bring inclusive management practices to my work?
Yes. So if you're not a people leader, you still
Oh,
have.
actually, I'm so sorry to interrupt, Kiana. We
No,
have
go ahead.
a couple questions from our audience.
Oh,
Tabitha is asking, what does DEI mean? And Sandra
ah,
and Sandra also has a question below that.
mhm.
How do you
Perfect.
handle employees who are upset that your organization is doing anti-racism workshops?
Oh, very good. So DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've added that little E for equity. Sometimes organizations are also kind of putting an extra acronym on there too. You'll hear DEIB, and that B is belonging because we want to create that. But that's kind of the jargon of the L&D inclusion work world. So that's what that acronym is for. Thank you. I should have said that out loud. Thank you for asking that question. And then Sandra, how do you handle employees who are upset that your org is doing anti-racism workshops? Um, so this is a difficult question, right? And I recognize the sensitivity of it in the sense that we are all in workplaces, and first and foremost, right, we are here in our capacity to like bring good work, right? And so I say this, like I'm gonna give you some my response, but I also want to say that like no one has to justify or do this or like explain why anti-racism workshops are good, right? If that's something that you feel you have like the heart and capacity to do, awesome, do that. But I blanket want to say like not my chair, not my problem. Like the onus is on white people to explain this to other white people and white aspiring people. Because again, white is a color, but we're dealing with whiteness, right? Which is a structural abstract that many different people across race and ethnicities have aspired to. So we are fighting whiteness in all its forms. But what I would say in terms of being upset, I think it's okay. I think anger is fine. And people can be like, hey, like, what are we doing? Blah, blah, blah. I oftentimes, when people have a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that they might benefit from something labeled anti-racism, and that's a little bit I was talking about later, is that I think it's uncomfortable for particularly white people to understand that every single one of them is racist. It is a legacy of living in this country and the way we have been socialized. This becomes difficult, again, when you think that racism is, I have been unkind to people of color, right? That's not what racism is. It is your participation and proliferation, right, of institutional systematic exclusion. And every single white person on this planet, with the exception of those who just scooted out in utero, right, will be a part of this process. So I think in terms of dealing with people's upset, one, I would argue it's not yours to deal with, but I think a fruitful response to that would be, hey, I understand, like, even if you don't think this is about you, I think that a lot of people in this company could benefit for understanding how we can be better people. And I invite you and I want to welcome you into this space that isn't for judgment. Don't have to say anything, but I'd love to just show you that there may be some ways, even if you're really moved far in your anti-racism practice, there's some other people who are going to need this. And so if that's not for you, that's not for you. But I know that, you know, even personally, I know that this is going to be beneficial to a lot of people, and we'd love your insight and, you know, just shared collective importance, right? So that's what I would say, because I think at this point, if like, you know, Trump's like, we don't want anti-racism training because it's anti-America. I'm like, he's right. He's not wrong, right? It is inherently anti-systems of oppression, AKA America. So like, he's right. He's not wrong. But at the fruit of that is like, is it something we want to persist? So that was a very long answer to be like, if you want to, girl. Like that's the answer. If you want to. Okay, that's well. More questions. More questions. Oh. I feel like I'm chit-chatting with my friends on YouTube.
So we did have that question about what can I do if I'm not a people leader to bring inclusive management practices to my work? And that was one of the questions that we received.
Absolutely. So I think this is still going to apply to you in terms of understanding your and your team members' motivations. I think that is going to be something that's really easy across the board. Even if you don't directly manage people, you are working with people. I don't know people who do a completely, entirely siloed job. So even if you're working with parallels on a team, right? You know, everyone has their little characters, right? What appeals to them? What's going to be motivating to them? How can we reinforce and lend them to their strengths, right? There's no use harping on the things people can't do. That's not helpful. What are things that they can do, and how can they bring that to their practice? How can you imbue them with confidence and power to do that? And I think even not being a manager, you can still enable people to have that level of engagement by, you know, shifting some of that autonomy to them. I think the number one thing that people want to feel in their work is empowerment, right? And if I'm working with a team member, I'm like, hey, we have this project. I'd really love to hear what about it excites you, because that's what I'd love to have you work on. And I can talk about the things that I'd love to do, and let's be really collaborative in terms of what's going to get us excited, instead of being like, you do this, I think you should do this, right? Collaborative team effort. It's something that we do every day. We can just be more vocal, right, about doing that, and constantly bring in that confidence around others.
Do we have any more questions from our audience?
Yeah, you can please ask me anything. I'm wild.
I'm Sandra. Thank you for answering the earlier question. I have a follow-up. Thank you so much. So I am the executive director of a nonprofit on a university campus. So by and large, I have the choir working for me, but I do have a division who is all white, and they have historically never employed a person of color. And I'm hosting a slew. I hired a consultant to come in and do anti-racism workshops. And this division, we've had now 3 workshops. 2 of the 3, they derail the conversations and make it about themselves. Last conversation, which was very upsetting to me, is that they went into a whole string about why white people get in trouble for using the N-word, and why black, I'm not even kidding you. And this is in an environment where it's incredibly progressive. This university that funds us is about 70% people of color. I mean, like, this is, and I'm struggling. I have my next anti-racism workshop tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. So I'm trying to psych myself up, and I love your energy, because I'm really putting myself in a place. And I've had a really long conversation with our consultant about how we can better handle, but I'm struggling because I literally have an entire division who is not just resistant. They're not upset, they're just resistant, and they're like intent on like flipping the table, you know, during the discussions. And it's not even a question at this point. It's just I'm just struggling in general, because people, like, it's so hard to see the real, you know, what do you call real America, or whatever they call it, right? Like, and this is, again, this is not, this is California. This is, you know, very, very diverse, very, very, you know, like, and yet these strains of like,
Yeah. So I think it's really difficult. And I will say this, I've recently been engaged to do some DEI workshop work with one of these lovely universities that are actually up here. I won't say which one. And so we're kind of running into the same thing, right? Like, there is this call to action, but the academy is calcified, right? We know that university systems themselves are built on the back of chattel slavery, and have been getting that energy and that income and that hedge fund energy the whole time. So it's not surprising. What I will say is, I think the actions of those people sound like that of animals backed into a corner, right? Like, this is sort of a last vestige for what they know, and in justifying, like, hey, I'm trying to get to like the empathy part of motivation, right? Which I'm like, are these people who are used to a system that has always benefited them? They've been told that they're doing good work, that they're shaping good minds, and now they're being confronted with the fact that their very work is detrimental, right? The very work to which they have dedicated themselves has caused more consternation for students who have come across, you know, their hallowed annals, than anything else. And I think that's really jarring. And so I do want to give a level of empathy for that, in the sense of I do understand, right? That being said, I think in your situation, and hopefully your consultant is, as an outside force, is able to kind of be this person and, make them work. Consultants are there to like push people in a different direction that maybe, people might not hear from us, but that outside force. So hopefully they're doing that kind of aggressive push. So, you don't have to be the bad guy. But I think for your consulting partner, it is going to be reclaiming that time. And I think the biggest thing that doesn't feel right, particularly when we want to be people who are discursive and communal at the same time, and we want to invite different opinions, is that some people's opinions actually just don't have a space. Like, I can't hold space for this. If we're talking about inclusion and how to bring our university literally in line with the population it serves, I don't have time for you talking about being mad how white people can't use the N-word. You can't, okay? Get over it. I think Ta-Nehisi Coates had this little wonderful thing where he was like, look, my wife is a woman. She calls her friends and gets on the phone and is like, what's up, bitch? Do you think I could get on the phone and say, what's up, bitch, to her friend? I can't do it. I know it's the same thing. I'm like, you can't do it. Okay, it's cool. There are things I can't do either. Okay, like, like, I'm not Latina. I'm not gonna be like, what's up, Chola? Like, that's not for me. That's not for me to do. It's not for me. So I think that's important. I think that's really hard for people to say, like, hey, I want this to be a safe place, but I also want you to understand that, like, any opinions that discredit people's lived experience or try to discredit their humanity, right? You're debating people's humanity. We can't entertain that, right? So, like, bring us here. I want to hear that worldview. I want to hear why this is so difficult for you. And honestly, like, making people who have these polarizing opinions actually communicate why they have them, they'll break it down themselves because they won't make any sense. They'll be like, say more. Say more. You're right. We're just letting in anybody these days. Who is just anybody? Please tell me more about these undesirables that we're admitting to the who? Oh, Mexican. Okay, cool. I see where you're at. I make them explain it. And I'll be like, so I don't know. It's really hard, but hopefully, you have some champions and they can just hold people to the fire, and hopefully they'll just get mad and retire or something.
Thank you. But even having this, just the 2 minutes that we had, thank you. I appreciate it.
And I'm just sending you lots of strength as you do this endeavor, because that's hard work. Okay. I'm sending you love. I'm sending you strength. Okay?
I need it.
Oh man. All right. I know y'all are probably ready to see these people's crazy president on TV, but anything else? Do we have time for another question, or are we wrapping it up? Tell me, Stephanie.
I think we might be wrapping it up.
Okay.
And that was amazing, Kiana. Thank you so much for the information, for your perspective. This was very helpful. It'll be very helpful for a lot of people. So this concludes tonight's event. Next Thursday, we'll have Jennifer Prescott as our speaker. She'll be talking about senior care trends in a COVID-19 world.
I'm so ready.
Have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you.
Kiana, you awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. It was really good.
Everyone. Thank you. Oh, what is? Were you listening? My cat was not listening. He's asleep. He did not care.